On the 2nd of April, 2013, a woman was brought into a police custody suite in Hereford, England, and told she was being held on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. The officers who processed her later described her demeanor as relaxed, almost casual, like someone who had been pulled over for a minor traffic stop and found the whole thing mildly inconvenient. When she was told the charges against her, she did not go quiet. She did not ask for a lawyer or break into tears. She responded with something that amounted to saying it could be worse, and her expression as she said it suggested she genuinely meant it that way. Her name was Joanna Christina Dennehy. She was 30 years old. In less than an hour before she was brought into that room, she had stabbed a man 30 times on a quiet residential street, genuinely believing that she had killed him. She had also killed 3 other people in the 10 days before that, and she had intended to kill several more before she was finished. Joanna grew up in Harpenden, which is a small market town in Hertfordshire, about 30 miles north of London. Her parents, Kevin and Kathleen, were working people who took their responsibilities seriously. Kevin worked as a security guard, and Kathleen worked in a local shop, and they kept a large 4-bedroom house with a garden. They had rules, but they were present and consistent. There was stability in that house. Her younger sister Maria was 3 years behind her, and the two of them were genuinely close. They shared a bunk bed. They had even invented their own private words, a language that only made sense between the two of them. After school, they would climb the tree in their back garden and sit up there for hours, just talking. If anyone at school said something unkind to Maria, Joanna would find that person and make them apologize to Maria. In primary school, she was bright and driven. She did well academically and was good at sports. Her parents even talked about law school for her, and it was not just wishful thinking. She seemed like someone who was going somewhere. Maria has said, in the rare interviews she has given since everything happened, that she has never been able to fully explain what changed. She has said only that one day her sister was there, and then gradually, she was not. The change began somewhere around 13, and once it started, it did not stop. Joanna began drinking, began using drugs, began skipping school, and coming home late. At the age of 13, she left the family home with an 18-year-old boy, gone for long enough that her parents genuinely did not know where she was. They got her back. Then, she left again. This became a pattern for the next several years, a push and pull between what her parents were trying to hold together and what Joanna was pulling herself toward. When she was 15, she started seeing a 20-year-old man named John Traynor. Her father went directly to John and told him that Joanna was a minor, but John stayed anyway. The arguments inside the house became daily events, loud and exhausting. For a period, Joanna and John set up a tent in the family garden rather than sleep under the same roof as her parents. Maria later described watching their mother cry almost every day during those months. When Joanna left the family home at 16 and moved in with John properly, her parents had run out of ways to stop her. She had 2 daughters with John over the following years. Her eldest, Xian, was born in 1999. A second child arrived 3 years later. During her first pregnancy, Joanna stopped drinking and stopped using drugs entirely, and stayed stopped for the duration of it. She was capable of that, which meant she could choose discipline when she wanted to. But once both children were born, the sobriety did not hold. She returned to drinking heavily, and what her household became in those years was not a safe place for anyone in it. She was drinking up to 2 bottles of vodka a day. When she was drunk or using, she became violent toward John, physically and unpredictably. He stayed longer than most people would have. In 2009, after she threatened him with a 6-inch dagger, he finally left. He took their daughters, who were 10 and 7, and moved to Glossop in Derbyshire, where he raised them. He did not hear from Joanna again until the newspapers made her impossible to ignore. By 2012, Joanna was in Peterborough, and her life had become precarious in concrete ways. She was arrested on assault charges and imprisoned briefly. She also spent several months in Peterborough City Hospital that year, where she was formally diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. When she was discharged, she needed somewhere to live and approached a local letting agency called Quicklet to find a room. The co-owner of the agency was a 48-year-old man named Kevin Lee. He found her a room and then offered her work alongside it, which involved helping him deal with tenants who had fallen behind on rent. It was confrontational work, the kind that required someone who did not back down easily, and Joanna suited it perfectly. Kevin Lee was married, yet he started an affair with Joanna shortly after hiring her. He told a close friend that she had suggested things about their relationship that were extreme, things involving control and dominance and pain. He eventually went along with it willingly, said was drawn to her in a way that clearly overrode whatever reservations he had. People who knew Joanna from this period in her life consistently described the same experience of her. She was striking, with blonde hair and blue eyes and tattoos across her body and piercings in her nose and tongue. But the physical description only partly explains what they were trying to convey. What they kept returning to was the feeling of her attention. When she focused on you, she seemed genuinely interested in who you were. She asked the right questions, responded in the right ways, and made people feel chosen. A criminologist named David Wilson, who holds a professorship at the University of Birmingham and has spent decades studying violent offenders, later described this quality in psychological terms. He said that people with this profile are skilled at making others feel central to them, because what they are actually doing is studying the other person, identifying what that person needs, and then providing it. It is not intimacy. It functions like intimacy, and from the inside, there is no visible difference. Wilson said the ability to do this convincingly is precisely what makes such people so difficult to identify before it is too late. Kevin Lee, for his part, thought he knew who Joanna was. He was wrong about that in the most permanent way possible. If you are watching this and you find yourself staying, please subscribe and leave a like on this video. It takes a few seconds and it makes a real difference to whether the next story finds its audience. Now, back to Peterborough, and to March 2013. On the 19th of March, Joanna sent a text message to a 31-year-old Polish man named Łukasz Slaboszewski. He worked as a warehouse clerk. He had been seeing Joanna for some time, and he spoke about her to his friends in a way that made it clear he believed the relationship was mutual. He called her his English girlfriend. He was proud of her. She asked him to come to a property she was managing for Kevin Lee in the Welland area on the north side of Peterborough, and he went without hesitation. As soon as he was through the door, she stabbed him in the heart with a small knife, dragged his body outside afterward, and left it in a bin on the street. A 14-year-old girl happened to walk past shortly after. Joanna stopped her and showed her the body. This was not by accident, and not in a moment of shock or confession. She wanted the girl to see it, because she wanted Łukasz to be found, and for people to know what had happened. However, the girl told no one, and Łukasz was not discovered. 10 days went by. Then, on the 29th of March, Joanna killed her roommate, a 56-year-old former Royal Marine named John Chapman, who had served in the Falklands War. She stabbed him while he was asleep. At trial, psychiatric experts testified that the account she gave of why she did it did not hold together, and that she seemed to require her victims to exist in a certain way in her own telling of events, and never as vulnerable people, always as something else. Later that same day, she sent Kevin Lee a message telling him to come to the property, and he did. She stabbed him 5 times, with wounds reaching his lungs and his heart. Afterward, she dressed his body in a black sequined dress and arranged it in a deliberate position before it was eventually found. Nothing about that was unplanned. She then sent a message to Gary Stretch Richards, a man with his own criminal history who had come into her world through her work with Kevin Lee. The message was 3 words: "Whoops, I did it again." Gary came. He brought along another man who lived in the same house, a 36-year-old man named Leslie Layton. The 2 of them drove the bodies to rural ditches and left them there. Gary followed Joanna's lead throughout, in the way that everyone who got close to her seemed to follow her lead, without fully understanding when they had stopped making their own decisions. By the 2nd of April, detectives were already looking into the disappearances in Peterborough. Joanna knew this. She was in a car with Gary, driving through Hereford, and she told him she needed to have fun. He stopped the car. A 64-year-old man named Robin Bereza was walking his dog when Joanna came up behind him and stabbed him. A passing car slowed down and the driver looked over. Joanna looked back with a completely calm expression, and then she returned to the vehicle. Fortunately, Robin Bereza survived. 9 minutes later, on a nearby street, she found another man walking a dog. His name was John Rogers, and he was 56 years old. She approached and stabbed him 30 times, then left, believing that she had killed him. Fortunately, he did not die, though the injuries he survived were severe. Witnesses had already begun calling the police. Multiple people had seen a blonde woman attacking people on the street, and surveillance cameras in the area had picked up the car. Within hours, Joanna was in custody. The footage from that arrest is the footage described at the beginning of this story. The smile, the jokes, the comment about a sexy remark. She behaved like someone who had just been stopped for a minor traffic infringement, not like someone who had killed 3 people and spent the previous hour trying to add to that number. When the charges were read to her, she said it could be worse. She meant it lightly, the way someone says it when they genuinely believe it. Kevin Lee's body had been found on the 30th of March, 2 days before Hereford recovered from a ditch in Newborough with stab wounds to the chest. Łukasz Slabishevsky and John Chapman were found on the 3rd of April. Both had wounds to the heart, the neck, and the torso. Joanna entered guilty pleas to all 3 murders, and both attempted murders. She did not make the court work for it. She said she had done it, said she was guilty, and offered nothing further. The Old Bailey described her in its formal proceedings as compulsive, calculating, manipulative, malicious, and a cruel liar. On the 28th of February, 2014, she received a whole life tariff. She is one of a very small number of women in British legal history to receive that sentence, which carries no possibility of parole and no review date, meaning that she will spend the rest of her life inside HMP Bronzefield in Surrey. Gary Stretch Richards was sentenced to life for his role in the attempted murders, and Leslie Layton received a lesser sentence for perverting the course of justice. In the assessments conducted after sentencing, the psychiatric picture that emerged of Joanna was detailed and consistent across multiple clinicians. She was diagnosed with psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and paraphilia. She told a prison psychiatrist that she had killed initially to find out what it felt like, to test whether she was as cold internally as she suspected she was. She said the first murder answered that question, and that she then discovered she enjoyed it. She used the phrase sadistic bloodlust to describe her own experience, and showed no visible discomfort saying it. She also told psychiatrists that her original intention had been to kill 9 men. She had chosen that number deliberately because she wanted to become more notorious than Bonnie and Clyde, the American criminal couple who became infamous in the 1930s. She wanted her name to be one that people could not ignore. In that narrow sense, and only in that sense, she got part of what she wanted. Christopher Barry D., a true crime author who wrote a book about her case titled Love of Blood, corresponded with Joanna after her sentencing. He received several letters from her, and what struck him was not their content but their contrast. In the letters she sent him, her handwriting was careful, her vocabulary precise, and her tone was measured and self-possessed. She presented as thoughtful and calm. But Barry D. also had access to letters she had written to Gary Stretch, and those read like they had come from a completely different person, in a completely different register. They were raw and unguarded in a way that made the letters to Barry D. feel like a performance designed specifically for him. He concluded that this was not casual. She was not simply adjusting her tone for different audiences the way most people do. She was constructing a version of herself for each person she wanted something from. And she was doing it with a consistency and precision that had clearly been working for years. Inside HMP Bronzefield, Joanna's arrival created an immediate problem. Rose West, the serial killer who had been imprisoned there for years, had to be transferred to another facility, all because Joanna had threatened to kill her. In 2014, she began corresponding with a builder from West Sussex, who later told tabloid press that he had fallen in love with her. What became clear was that Joanna had been using that correspondence as part of a plan. She had worked out an escape route that involved killing a prison guard, using the guard's fingerprints to bypass the facility's biometric security system, and getting out. The plan was discovered before any of it could be acted upon, and she was placed in isolation. In August 2018, Joanna and her girlfriend at the time were found unconscious together in their cell, lying in blood. Joanna had attempted to cut her throat. Her girlfriend had wounds on her wrists. Both of them survived. A second attempt by Joanna followed not long after, and that one also failed. Also in 2017, she began telling other inmates that the actual number of people she had killed was 4, not 3. No evidence was ever found to support that claim, and investigators could not verify it. Whether it was true or whether it was Joanna feeding the only appetite that had followed her into prison, the need to be remarkable, the need to be the most frightening person in the room, is something that cannot be cleanly answered. In January 2017, Joanna's mother Kathleen gave an interview to a documentary channel and described a daughter who had loved sports, who had felt genuine distress at accidentally stepping on insects, and who had been polite and warm with everyone around her. She acknowledged that everything changed in Joanna's teens. She said she had watched her daughter begin to disappear from them gradually and had not known how to stop it. That same year, Joanna's eldest daughter, Shianne, who was then around 17, was navigating what she later described as a life spent under a shadow she had not created. She had found out her mother was a serial killer at 13, overhearing it at a friend's house, then going home and searching online until she had the full picture. She spent years afraid, in a very specific and practical way, that she might inherit whatever her mother had. She asked her father once whether she was going to become like her mother. He did not have an easy answer to that question. In October 2018, Shianne wrote to Joanna in prison. She was 19 by then. She said she went in cold, not expecting warmth back, only wanting answers that she had been unable to get anywhere else. The letter she received in return was full of affection, full of expressed longing for the years they had missed, full of things a mother says to a daughter she loves. Shianne said it made her cry, and she said it without fully explaining whether those were tears of relief or something more complicated. She visited Joanna in person. She described sitting across from her at a prison table, looking at this woman with short blonde hair and face piercings, and noticing that she looked smaller than expected. She told Joanna she had missed her. She said she had not expected to say it. Joanna apologized. The visit ended, and Shianne left without the answer she had gone in hoping for. What Shianne said publicly about the victims' families has stayed with people who followed this case. She said her mother deserved to remain in prison for the rest of her life. She said the families of the people Joanna killed were still waiting in the dark for a reason, just as she was, and that they deserved better than that. She said her mother's surname had followed her everywhere she had tried to go, that she could not build anything without it attaching itself. And then she apologized directly to the families of the victims, without qualification, for something she had played no part in causing. She did not have to do that. Nobody expected it from her. She did it anyway. There is a neighbor named Tony Ann Roberts who knew people connected to this case, and she gave journalists a description of Joanna that has stayed in many accounts of it. She said Joanna could identify within moments of meeting someone who had low self-esteem, and then she would move toward those people directly, like she had found what she was looking for. She said men around Joanna behaved as though they had lost the ability to think clearly. She said she still remembered the way Joanna looked at you sometimes, and that even years later, the memory of it made her uncomfortable. That description reappears throughout this case in different forms. Lucas Labashevsky spoke about Joanna with pride to his friends right up until the day she asked him to come to that house. Kevin Lee knew their relationship was complicated and went to meet her anyway. Gary Stretch received 3 words telling him she had committed multiple murders and went to help her rather than to the police. Every person who got close to Joanna believed, at some point, that they had reached something genuine in her. None of them had. Joanna Dennehy is now in her early 40s. She has been inside HMP Bronzefield for over a decade. The whole life tariff attached to her sentence does not have a review mechanism. She will die there. The case produced books, documentaries, and academic analyses in the years following the trial. Forensic psychologists who have studied her profile have noted, consistently, that female offenders who kill purely for pleasure, without financial motive, without the influence of a dominant partner, and with the stated intention to kill as many people as possible, are genuinely rare in documented criminal history. Most accounts place her in a very small category. She had set a target of 9 men. She reached 3. She was working on her 4th and 5th when she was arrested in Hereford. The criminologists and psychiatrists who have spent years studying this case have come closer to an answer than most, with their diagnoses and their frameworks and their careful language about what Joanna is and how she operates. But even the most thorough psychiatric assessment cannot fully close the distance between the girl in the back garden tree, singing with her sister in a language nobody else spoke, and the woman in that arrest footage, smiling at the officers while the man she had just stabbed 30 times was still lying on the pavement a street away. That distance is the part that nobody has been able to fully explain, and it is, in the end, the part of this story that stays with you the longest. If you stayed until the end of this one, thank you. This case is genuinely difficult to sit with, and I appreciate you being here for it. If you have thoughts or if there is a case you think belongs on this channel, leave it in the comments below. Subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you in the next one.